All right. Well, it's about 2 after, and I think we're seeing a tapering off on new people joining. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As you probably noticed when you logged on, this meeting is being recorded. We're going to record these 2 sessions we're doing of the same material and patch together the best of both into a kind of greatest hits for the people who couldn't make either. So my name is Dan Cullinan. I am co-director of the Student Success Acceleration Program's implementation study. Some of you may have seen me on other calls or seen me on emails. And so this is the first of our webinar series for technical assistance and professional development. And the topic today is financial sustainability. And so we are talking about, based on our previous work, mainly with the CUNY ASAP, Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, and its replication in Ohio, we developed approaches to looking at cost per degree and the offset of tuition and performance funding for what was at the time a very costly program, and realizing that there are offsetting sources of revenue for some of these programs' expenses, and that varies by program and varies by state, but we have all the Texas data. And our presenter today, Austin Slaughter, was really the lead in developing a tool that would do these calculations for student success programs, either based on past programs or if you have ideas about, a new program and what to expect from it. And so I'm just going to hand it over to him and let him take it away. And he can also give us kind of the parameters around asking questions and what to expect throughout the session today. So Austin, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, like Dan was saying, my name is Austin Slaughter. So I'm a Technical Research Associate at MDRC in our post-secondary education policy area. Like Dan mentioned, I led the development of our intervention return on investment tool, which is a web app that we launched last year, and we're going to have a chance to take a look at later on today. I also just feel like I should mention that I am a product of the Texas public higher education system. I am from East Texas, born and raised near Tyler. So went to UT Tyler for undergrad. Also took some dual enrollment courses at Tyler Junior College when I was in high school, back in the mid 2000s, before dual enrollment was cool. So yeah, very much a product of the Texas public higher education system, and excited to give back in a very small way today. Last thing I'll say that's maybe relevant to this, to our conversation today, is that I have a 2-month-old here at home. So apologies if you hear him in the background, and he also woke up very early this morning. So apologies if I am a little sleepy today, but we'll be okay. All right, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint here. I don't use Teams as often as I use Zoom, so apologies if this takes me a second. Okay, Dan, are you seeing the right screen?
Yes, I am, considering intervention return on investment.
Yes, okay, great. Just want to make sure y'all weren't seeing my notes. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about considering intervention return on investment today. Okay, so what is an intervention return on investment analysis? You probably have not heard this term before because MDRC kind of made it up. As far as we know, there wasn't really a term for this, so this is kind of the name that we came up with. Okay, so the idea behind the intervention ROI analysis is that this is something you would do when considering adopting a new intervention or a new program. I know intervention is kind of like a researchy term, but you should just think of it as any change to institutional practice that is intended to improve student outcomes. right? So it could be anything like an enhanced advising program, could be dev ed reform, could be like changes to institutional financial aid, anything that has sort of a cost side to it, and then also might affect student outcomes. And the idea is that this is an analysis that you would do at the beginning that can help to sort of inform the decision around whether to adopt this intervention and planning for the financial sustainability of the intervention. So the idea is to estimate the costs and also the revenues resulting from the intervention. So you have kind of these two sides. How much is the intervention going to cost? And if the intervention is successful, improves student outcomes, how much revenue might it bring in for the institution? We're going to go into more detail on all of this later, so I'm just going to kind of keep things high level here for now. But on the cost side, there are direct costs, so directly associated with the program. Maybe there is like a coordinator you need to hire, coaches, maybe like some sort of financial payments to students. So those would be direct costs. And then there are also indirect costs. So if the program is successful, retains more students, then that's probably going to also create additional instructional costs to educate those students. On the revenue side, if the intervention is successful, again, if it retains more students, causes them to attempt more credits, that's going to bring in tuition revenue. In most states, including Texas, I know that that's also going to bring in more state funding, which I believe y'all are shifting right now from a state funding model that's mostly based on credits attempted or contact hours, shifting more towards outcomes, I believe. And then I threw local funding up on here. I don't think local funding is typically relevant to this conversation. My understanding is that local funding is typically based on property taxes, sales taxes, so it's not directly tied to enrollment or outcomes or anything like that. But just in case there is someone out there for whom that is relevant for their local funding formula. And then the last piece that might be relevant on the revenue side is auxiliary revenue. So anything like revenue from the campus bookstore, dorms, meal plans, if you're retaining more students, that could also bring in more revenue through those avenues. So the intervention ROI analysis is something that should be conducted from the institution perspective. This is intended to really be like a planning tool for institutions to look at, this program is going to cost us $1,000 per student. It's going to bring in $300 of revenue per student. So, we have this $700 gap per student that we need to address, figure out. But at the same time, while it's intended to be a planning tool for institutions, we should also bear in mind that successful interventions that improve student outcomes have a lot of benefits to students and society. So when we do an analysis like this, if you get the result, like I just said, $1,000 of cost, $300 of revenue, the fact that costs exceed revenue should not be taken as a sign that, oh, this program shouldn't be implemented or anything like that. Once you account for those benefits to students and society, very likely that it would pass, a cost benefit analysis. Okay, so why do this? So college administrators that we've spoken with have said that they believe this can improve decision-making around adopting an intervention. Without doing any sort of calculation like this, it's very likely that there would be colleges who are choosing to not adopt an intervention based on a mistaken belief that they cannot afford it, when in reality they can. Maybe they're not fully taking into account the revenue that this program might generate for the college and think that they can afford it when really they can. Conversely, there might be some institutions who choose to adopt a program believing that it can be financially sustainable for them, and then ultimately it is not, and the program ends up having to be discontinued. So doing this sort of analysis ahead of time can sort of create better alignment between interventions and institutions. The second way that this can improve decision-making is by reducing uncertainty and status quo bias. There's a lot of research showing that in the presence of heightened uncertainty about a decision, that decision makers tend to be biased towards the status quo. So, if you sort of don't do an analysis like this, if it's sort of just like a vague, like this program is going to cost us maybe somewhere from $1,000 to $4,000 per student, and it might bring in some revenue, but we're not quite sure. There's a lot of uncertainty in that, and that's going to kind of push people to want to stick with the status quo. It can also, doing this kind of analysis can also help to plan for the financial sustainability of the intervention. So like I was talking about earlier, so maybe you identify that you have sort of a $700 gap per student that you need to address. So maybe you want to identify external funding to fill that gap. Maybe you're able to reallocate existing internal resources. And then another thing to consider could be if the cost of the intervention could be reduced to kind of help make up that gap. I will say the one caveat with that that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of times if you reduce the cost of a program, that also might make it less effective, and making it less effective might mean it brings in less revenue, right? So if you think, instead of hiring coaches, we're just going to do peer mentors. Well, the peer mentors might not be as effective as the hired coaches would have been. So then it doesn't retain as many students, and then it doesn't bring in as much tuition revenue, for example. And so ultimately, the idea here is that doing this kind of analysis ahead of time will help to create stronger interventions and better outcomes for students. This presentation today, we're going to be talking a lot about dollars. It's sort of the focus of the presentation, but I think we should keep in mind that sort of the idea underpinning all of this is wanting to produce better outcomes for students. Okay, so now digging in a little bit more about how to do this. So how to estimate costs. Like I was saying, there are two kinds of costs. Direct costs are the costs directly associated with the program, right? Providing the program services to students. So I think the ideal scenario here is that there is previous research about the program or the intervention that you're wanting to implement. So in that scenario, and hopefully that previous research has included a cost analysis. So in that scenario, in that ideal scenario, you can take the cost estimates from that research, just adjust it based on inflation up to current dollars, and then also adjust based on regional prices. I think a lot of people are familiar with adjusting for inflation based on consumer price index. I think from what I've experienced, people are less familiar with regional price parity. It's that data is available from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It has every kind of metropolitan statistical area, or states are divided into metro, non-metro, relative to national average. So you're able to adjust prices between different regions of the country. So if there's not previous research on the program, or it didn't include a cost analysis, the cost analysis method that MDRC uses, it's called the ingredients method. It's pretty simple, but just sort of gives you a framework for this. So the steps are to identify the ingredients of the program. So for example, there's a coordinator, we need coaches, there are going to be financial payments, supplies, for example. Determine the prices, the coordinator is going to cost this amount, coaches are going to cost this amount, and then the number of units. We need one coordinator, we need 3 coaches, etc. And that'll, I think, it's still ideal for there to be previous research, because, things never kind of go smoothly. It's better to see how things played out in the real world. But in absence of that, this is sort of the best option. For estimating the indirect cost of the program, so that's the cost of, if this program is successful and retains more students, what are the additional kind of operating expenditures that we're going to incur in educating the student? So again, hopefully, ideally, there would be previous research on the program, so you would know, how much, what is the effect of this intervention on the number of credits that students are going to attempt. And then that can be multiplied by the college's marginal cost per credit. So I know that can be kind of a tough thing to figure out, but if you figure out, it costs us $100 to deliver one additional credit, and this program causes students to take 5 more credits, over the course of 2 years or something, then you can estimate that we're going to incur $500 of additional operating expenditures to educate the student, or to educate, to cover the additional 5 credits that they take. I guess just one thing that I'll mention here in talking about marginal cost per credit is that it can be kind of tricky to estimate, because it's really easy to estimate average cost per credit. You just take, what is our total expenditures, how many credits did we deliver, that'll give you the average cost per credit. But typically the marginal cost per credit is going to be less than average, because colleges have a lot of fixed costs associated with them, that don't increase with additional students. Oh, and I guess I'll mention, for what it's worth, if you really just sort of are at a loss for the number to use here, MDRC, what we've been using in the ROI tool, which I'll show you in a little bit later, is 30%. That sort of based on some analyses that we've done, some assumptions that we've made, we think kind of on average, it varies a lot by colleges, but on average, we think that marginal costs are around 30% of average cost per credit. Okay, so switching to the revenue side, the fun side of the equation. So tuition revenue, so similar to the previous, the calculation we were just talking about. So if you know how many, additional credits students are going to take as a result of receiving this program. So I think we mentioned 5 credits attempted, and then you multiply that by the college's tuition revenue per credit. So for each additional credit that students take, how much tuition revenue does that bring in for the institution? So yeah, just for example, let's say if it's $150 tuition revenue per credit, and multiplied by additional 5 credits, so then this program is going to bring in $750 of additional tuition revenue for the institution. A couple things to keep in mind for tuition revenue per credit is to just bear in mind institutional discounts. So any sort of institutional scholarships that you give out to students, that would need to be factored in. And also out-of-district tuition prices should be taken into account. The other big source of revenue is state funding. Similar calculations to what we've been talking about, but just a little bit more complicated, because state funding models, and I know at least Texas's old state funding model, and I believe the one you're transitioning to also rewards several different outcomes. So it's a similar calculation, you just have to do it more times because there are more outcomes. So again, take the impact of the program, ideally estimated from previous research, on the outcomes that are rewarded by the state funding model, and then you multiply that by the state funding per that outcome. So for example, if state funding model provides, or the state funding formula provides $2,000 per associate degree, per additional associate degree, and this program increases associate degree attainment by 10 percentage points, then you would multiply that together, and you would expect that on average the program is going to result in $200 of additional state funding as a result of producing additional associate degrees. And then another thing to mention here is just to consider equity premiums. I haven't looked into Texas's new funding model, so I don't know if there are equity premiums in it. But a lot of states, there is additional funding for enrollment or outcomes achieved by different student populations, low-income students, adult students, students with remedial needs, for example. So just kind of a reminder to take that into consideration when you're making these calculations. And then, like I mentioned earlier, potentially local funding can be relevant to you, and also auxiliary revenue might be relevant. Okay, so this all sounds probably really complicated and really tricky. But one thing that's good to know is that there are some tools out there to help with this. So ACE, the American Council on Education, I think, has a tool that they've created to estimate the costs and revenues of instructional improvement efforts. And then IHEP, Institute for Higher Education Policy, I believe, has a calculator where you can estimate, if I'm remembering correctly, it's forgiving institutional debt, sort of as a strategy for re-engaging students. They have sort of an ROI, or re-engagement investment calculator, for that type of program. And then that we're going to look at later on today, MDRC has a tool that works for all community colleges in the US, and it includes 19 pre-populated interventions that MDRC has studied with a randomized controlled trial. And it also includes the option to input your own intervention with a little bit more work, right? Because you'll need to input the cost of the intervention and the expected impacts on student outcomes. Okay, so just to hit some high-level takeaways before we go to Q&A and then the demo of the tool. So, of course, new interventions typically result in costs and also revenues. I think people tend to be very aware of the costs. Revenues are considered less often, but yeah, both important pieces to consider. Like we talked about, college administrators that we've spoken with have said that these type of analyses can lead to better decisions and planning for financial sustainability of these programs. Like I mentioned, cutting costs does not necessarily make a program more sustainable if cutting those costs also makes it less effective, and then it brings in less revenue. So the ROI of a program can depend on the alignment of an intervention and the institution, right? So what are the outcomes that drive an institution's revenue, and then what are the outcomes that are affected by this intervention? So, for example, if it's a program that's all focused on getting students through gateway course completion, through gateway courses, in a state that does not reward gateway course completion, then that's not going to be something that drives revenue. Although completing gateway courses, presumably there would also be some effects on enrollment there. Yeah, just another plug that if you in states with equity premiums, that ROI can also depend on the population served. So if there are premiums for low-income students, the program might generate more revenue if it is targeted to low-income students, as long as it's still as effective for low-income students, right? If you target it to low-income students and it's not as effective, then it could actually, not generate as much revenue. And then, yeah, just keep in mind that there are ROI tools out there to help with this. Okay, so we're going to do a demo of the MDRC's intervention ROI tool in a little bit, but I think we wanted to go to Q&A first because we're going to, the ROI tool that we're going to demo, it is intended to be used by community colleges. I think that it would be useful to, if you work at a university, I think it would still be useful to stick around for the demo just to sort of see like an example of these calculations, kind of see it in practice. But that said, I totally would not blame you if you feel like, this tool is not made for us. We're not going to actually be able to use this tool. If you don't want to stick around for the demo, that's totally fine. So we wanted to have time for Q&A now before we launch into the demo. And I think I might stop sharing my screen. So yeah, feel free to jump in if you have any questions, and I might check the chat real quick to see if there are any questions in there. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat.
There will be another opportunity for Q&A after the demo as well, because it may be that more questions arise in kind of the details of using that tool. So
yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll do another Q&A after the demo. Okay. Not hearing any questions, in which case we will go ahead and launch into the demo of the tool. Okay. So this is our intervention ROI tool. This is kind of just introducing you to the tool, to these kind of calculations. I've kind of already covered most of this, so we won't spend too much time here. I guess one thing I will mention here is that, you know, if you don't get enough of, you know, this demo here today that we, or you know, if there's some other colleague that you would want to send, that you would want to show the demo to, we have a link to a YouTube video here that walks through the demo. Although I guess we're also recording this, so you'll have a recording of this demo as well. Okay, so this is the first page where you choose the intervention that you would like to use. There are two options here. You can use an intervention from an MDRC study, or you can use your own intervention. First, we're going to walk through an MDRC study, and then I'll circle back and show how to input your own intervention. Okay, so there is an option here to filter the programs based on kind of the program components. You don't have to use the filters. You can just jump straight to the different programs that we have pre-programmed in here. But yeah, if you know that you're interested in, you know, an enhanced advising program that provides financial support to students, you can filter based on that. And then this list of programs, interventions here is going to be limited to only those that include at least one of these components. And the programs that are in bold include both of the components. So anything in bold includes financial support and enhanced advising. All right, so we're going to go with ASAP as implemented in Ohio for the demo today. So when you select a program, a bunch of information is going to pop up over here on the right. The name of the program, a description of it, a summary of the impacts from the original study, estimate of the costs from the original study, and the duration of the intervention. There's also some information about the study here. So you can see that this study included about 1,500 students across 3 institutions in Ohio. If you want to read MDRC's report on this program, we include a link to it there. And then this table at the bottom includes all of the components included in the intervention. So we already know that it includes financial support and enhanced advising, but you can also see that ASAP includes a tutoring component and a focus on enrollment intensity. Okay, so yeah, this is the program that we're going to use for the demo today. So then you select your state. I think it makes sense for us to go with Texas today. I don't know if anyone from Texas State Technical College is on the call, but if you are, it's important to choose that that option, because I know there's a different state funding model for Texas State Technical College. Okay, so we've selected Texas as our state. So now we're going to select our college. There are two options here. You can choose a specific college, or you can just use the average college in your state. We envision choosing a specific college being sort of the main way that people use the tool. But the average college is there. The idea is that maybe state policymakers are interested in implementing a program, but they're not sure which college in the state would implement the program. The average college kind of gives you a ballpark idea. But we're going to go with a specific college today. So we have a list of all the Texas community colleges here. I'll go with my home community college, junior college of TJC. Okay, so like we were talking about earlier, the first step in this process is we're going to estimate the cost of ASAP if it were implemented at TJC. Okay, so the first costs are the direct cost. What the tool has done in the background here is it's taken the cost estimates of ASAP as implemented in Ohio in, I forget, 2016, 2018. It's adjusted those costs for inflation up to actually, we just updated it the other day, and it's now up to $2023, which, unfortunately are quite a bit different than $2022 actually. And then also adjusted it based on regional prices. So we've adjusted based on differences in, prices, salaries, et cetera, between Ohio, where the 3 study colleges were, and the Tyler area. So we're estimating that ASAP would cost around $6,700 per student across the full 3 years of the program if it were implemented at TJC. Okay, so the next costs that we're estimating are the indirect costs, right? So if the program retains more students, how much more is it going to cost us to educate those students? So the way we've done this here, I think I mentioned earlier, sort of the trickiness of this calculation. So we've calculated from iPads the average expenditure per credit, and then you can set the marginal cost per credit equal to some percentage of the average cost. Like I said earlier, the default that we've set the tool to is 30%. If you're at an institution that has a lot of spare capacity and you could serve additional students for relatively little additional cost, this number might be closer to 0. If your institution is at capacity and any more students is going to mean like building new buildings and hiring a bunch of new faculty and staff, then this number is going to be higher. So I know enrollment at community colleges has been down in the pandemic, so we're going to assume right now that TJC has some spare capacity and say that this number is 20%. All right, this page is showing the estimated effect of ASAP on credits attempted in the original study. So in the first year of the program, ASAP increased the number of credit students were attempting by 5.6 credits on average, in year 2 by 4.6 credits on average, and then, very close to 0 in years 3 and 4. So this page is estimating the indirect costs of the program. So we told the tool that it costs $104 per credit, $104 to, for each additional credit that the college delivers. ASAP increased credits attempted in the first year by 5.6 credits. So that's going to result in $580 of additional operating expenditures in year 1. And then these calculations are repeated for years 2, 3, and 4. This page is just combining our estimated direct costs and our estimated indirect costs and showing that the program would cost an estimated $7,800 per student if implemented at TJC. All right, so shifting to the revenue side of this calculation now. So this page is where you input the tuition revenue per credit, right? How much tuition revenue does the college bring in for each additional credit that students attempt? The number that's in here, this $99 per credit number, is it's taken from iPads. It's the in-district tuition price as reported to iPads. But you can override this number here. Like I was saying earlier, if you want to take into account institutional expenditures and also out-of-district tuition prices, one of those goes one way and the other goes the other. So, could be that you want to input less, could end up being that you want to input more. but we're just going to stick with the default for today. Very similar calculation to earlier, but now we're doing it for tuition revenue. So ASAP increased the number of credit students attempted in year 1 by 5.6. We're bringing in $99 for each additional credit that students take. So it's the program is going to generate $551 of additional tuition revenue in year 1. And then again, calculations are repeated for years 2, 3, and 4. All right, state funding. I should say that, so this is the state funding model based on fiscal year 2022. So the old state funding model, not the new one that I know you're transitioning to right now. We always knew that this was going to be sort of the biggest limitation of the tools, that we were going to model these state funding formulas, and then they would change over time. So Texas is the first one for which that concern has manifested. So we haven't updated it yet. My understanding is that, that is happening this year. I think Texas's fiscal year ends in September. So I would expect that, the documents that I would need to make these calculations probably won't be public until next year, probably about a year from now, I guess. So we do plan to update the state funding model in the tool at that point. But for now, the numbers that we have in there are based on the old state funding model. We have documentation here of how we made these calculations, and you can also override these default values that we have here. So, if you're able to beat us to the punch and, calculate these estimates before we're able to, and, I have no idea what the new model is going to be, but say, that it's $1,000 per associate degree, you can input that there. Okay, similar calculations to before, just again, many more outcomes. Sorry, this is not actually where the calculation, this is just where we're showing the effects of ASAP on each of these outcomes here. So for example, ASAP increased the associate degree attainment by about 10 percentage points in year 2 and 6.7 percentage points in year 3. So this is where the calculation is made, where we're taking those estimated effects on each outcome, the dollar amount associated with each outcome, and then you can see, most of the state funding is going to happen in years 1 and 2, which is where the effects of ASAP were mostly concentrated in years 1 and 2. Over here on the right, again, this is the old state funding model, so you can see, most of the additional state funding is going to come from credits attempted. I think contact hours is what they call it in the Texas state funding formula. But. Okay, so here we're just bringing the tuition revenue and state funding together. We don't have any calculations in the tool for local funding or auxiliary revenue. So if that is something that's relevant to you, that's just kind of something to keep in mind here. So we're estimating that ASAP, if implemented at TJC, would bring in about $2,200 of revenue per student.
This is Kimberly.
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Good, how are you? Good morning.
I have a slight headache, but then I'm trying to cope with it.
Okay, I'm going to mute
Listen,
everyone.
I have a question to ask you.
Thanks, Dan. I think I'm still unmuted. Okay, looks like you did not mute me. Okay, this page, this is the last page before we get to the results. So the idea behind this page is we're just taking a look at the characteristics of the original study colleges as compared to TJC. So the idea here is just to think about, is there any way in which my college differs from the original study colleges that makes me feel like, the effects from that study might not translate to my college, to my context. So for example, if I'm looking at this, I think probably the thing that jumps out to me the most is the difference in the age of the population, that TJC serves a younger population. So if you had some reason to think that ASAP maybe is not going to be as effective for younger students, then you should kind of keep that in mind. Or it can go the other way if you think it's going to be more effective for younger students. That's something to keep in mind when interpreting these results. Okay, so this is the results page, bringing everything together, the $7,800 of cost, $2,200 of revenue. So we're estimating that leaves a gap of $5,600 approximately per student that would need to be covered by reallocating existing internal resources, securing external funding, or cutting costs in a way that does not make the program less effective. We also have a reminder here just to keep in mind that these programs, this analysis is just from the perspective of the institution. ASAP, any intervention that improves student outcomes is going to also have benefits to students in society that are not captured by this tool. So just because you see, that there's a gap here, that the revenue doesn't exceed the cost, that shouldn't be interpreted as, that this is a program that shouldn't be implemented. What else should I cover here? So there is a option to download a PDF of the results here. So rather than, keeping this window open until you have a chance to meet with your team, you can download a PDF. You can email it around, attach it to a meeting invite, whatever you want to do. So it basically just summarizes everything that we just walked through. All of the calculations that were made, here are the costs, here are the revenues, that table comparing the study colleges to the user's college, and then some more information about the program here. And then last thing I'll point out is that we have an FAQ here. So if you have any questions, feel free to take a look here at how, any sort of assumptions that were made or how certain things are calculated. And if you still have questions, we have an email address here, roitool@mdrc.org, or you could also email me or Dan. Okay, so that's ASAP. One thing that I wanted to show quickly. So if you're looking at this like very daunted by this gap, thinking, man, there's no way we could cover a gap of $5,600 per student. I do want to show that there's sort of a range of outcomes here. That while I would say that result that we just saw is typical, typically, these programs don't recoup all of their costs or even a majority of their costs. There are other interventions that have that recoup a larger percentage of their costs. So just want to walk through that real quick to show you. I'm going to leave everything the same. And I should say, so this program that we're looking at, EVE, Encouraging Additional Summer Enrollment, this was a communication campaign focused on encouraging students to take courses in the summer. And this version of the intervention was also coupled with a last dollar tuition assistance. So any tuition that was left over after grants, Pell Grant, et cetera, the college committed to cover. Because they focused on Pell students, there was actually, it ended up being very cheap. The college, didn't have to cover very much of the tuition at all. Okay, so here is a result in which this program actually generates more revenue than it costs. So, taking into account, all the caveats, any sort of uncertainty in the estimates, based on these sort of assumptions that we put into the tool, this scenario, we're estimating that this program effectively pays for itself at TJC. So basically, this is a program that could, modestly improve, short-term student outcomes at effectively no cost to the institution. So that's kind of an exciting thing to see. Okay, last thing that I'm going to show is just briefly how to input your own intervention. A lot of the pages are similar, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. I'm just going to show you the pages that are different. So we're going to name our intervention fake. financial aid for K-12 educators, we'll call it. It's not a real program, but so we're going to say that it's for brand new students, and we're going to say that this is a 2-year program. So I'm just going to stick with Texas to keep everything simple, TJC. Okay, so this is a page that's going to be different because this is not a program that's based on an MDRC study. You'll have to input the estimated cost of this program, and then it'll ask you, is this from your college using current dollars? We're going to say no, that this is actually an estimate that was taken from some non-MDRC study in rural Georgia in 2016, let's say. So the tool is going to take this $2,000 cost estimate, and it's going to adjust it, first to national 2016 dollars, national 2023 dollars, and then 2023 dollars in the Tyler area. So this intervention that cost $2,000 in rural Georgia in 2016 would actually cost $2,800 at TJC in 2023. I guess we'll also set this to 20%. So this is another page that's different. You'll need to input the effect of the program on credits attempted. So we're going to say that this program causes students to take 6 more credits. This page is mostly the same. The one thing to point out is that just to kind of, for simplicity, we assume that those 6 credits are evenly spread across the duration of the program. So we said it's a 2-year program. So we're assuming that it's 3 credits in each year. Doesn't really make a difference except for the discount rate is the only reason why that assumption isn't quite perfect. This page is the same. This is the same. Okay, so this is a page that's different. So you're going to need to input the effect of our program fake on the outcomes rewarded by the state funding model. So we're going to say this increases associate degree attainment by 8 percentage points, certificate attainment by 2 percentage points. We'll just set all of these at 4. We're going to make things easy on ourselves for the demo here and just say that some of these estimated effects are not available. Okay, so the rest of these pages are going to be the same, and they're the results that we get based on those, the cost and the estimated effects that we put in. Okay, so I think that is everything that I have for the demo. And I think we wanted to have another Q&A session. So yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions or drop any questions in the chat. And also feel free to ask, just like clarifying questions about something specific or just sort of like broad, more broad general questions. I think I see a question in the chat. Can you put in your own institution discount rate? That's a good question. No, so we have, right now, the way we have it programmed is we assume a discount rate of 4%. But that's a good point. We should consider making that adjustable because, there are reasons why, different colleges might want to use a different discount rate. So that's a good suggestion. I think that's something that we'll consider. Any other questions? Okay. If not, if you think of a question later, feel free to email me.
I do see someone's typing. There we go. Yeah.
Okay. With the spreadsheet, we got a similar model if the online tool doesn't allow enough flexibility. I'm not sure what spreadsheet. Dan, is there a spreadsheet that you sent out that I'm not aware of?
Well, we sent a spreadsheet out to capture aggregate data, and then we sent a template out for the cost request. Neither of those actually do any calculations, though.
Okay.
So I'm afraid that won't be too helpful for this purpose.
Gotcha. I mean, I will say that I know some colleges that we've spoken with, if there is some reason why, the tool doesn't allow the flexibility that you need, feel free to go into the tool and just grab like numbers from the tool and plug it into your own spreadsheet. Feel free to grab, like you could grab the estimated effects of ASAP and plug that into your spreadsheet, or if you want to use like our estimates of the state funding model. Again, I know Texas's state funding model is changing. But yeah, feel free to grab any of those numbers and plug that into your own spreadsheet. Okay. Not seeing any other questions, so maybe I will pass it back to Dan.
Yeah, so maybe what we'll do at this point is, I know sometimes it can take a moment to formulate and either state or type a question. I don't think Austin will hate me too much if I commit us to staying until noon our time, 11 your time. So we'll be online for another 5 minutes. If you do think of a kind of a question and want to get it in by that deadline. Otherwise, you have my contact information, and I believe Austin's was on that email as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. We are going to be engaging with individual colleges that have questions about our webinars and trying to get those questions answered. And if you need help with a specific thing, there's a possibility we can even meet with you to talk that over. So yeah, I'm just going to stand by for the next 5 minutes here with Austin, and then we will end the webinar. Thank you all so much for attending.
Dan, I have a question not specific to this resource or tool, but more specific to what we're required of as grantee recipients. The survey that has been mentioned in previous webinars, will we be having a future webinar to discuss what that survey looks like in the process and how we get a hold of it, et cetera?
Okay, do you talking about the student survey?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So what's going to happen is, once that's finalized, our fielding date for that is around the first of the next month, so in about 3 weeks or so. And what we'll be doing is sending it to all the program directors' emails that we have, and you'll be able to send that for those of you grantees that do have active student success programs, which I know is a subset because some are doing campus initiatives, some are doing technology and infrastructure. But if you're doing a student success program and you actually have a group of students who've experienced it, we ask that you send the link out to those students, and then they will be able to click on that and opt into it to answer the survey and receive a small stipend for their participation in that. So look for that, as I say, in about 3 weeks.
Okay, I like how you said participants, because that was a follow-up question. Is we are a student success program, but we are also new. This is the first, month of it existing, so we don't necessarily have participants currently in our program. So I just wanted to clarify that piece of the puzzle for us, as we don't have anyone to really send anything to.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for raising that. So that's yet another category. So I mentioned that there were student success programs, and then there were campus initiatives and infrastructure and tech. But among the student success programs, there are two groups: one that has already implemented in the fall, and then one that is just getting started maybe now, or doesn't have students yet. So Christabel's point is correct. You won't be able to send the survey link to students if none have experienced the program yet. So it really will be those grantees that have already implemented that will be able to send out that survey link.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Of course.
Sorry,
Thank you
Austin.
for
Also, I
No
hope you
worries.
get some sleep tonight with your 2-month-old. I
Thank you.
relate to that very much. So
Thank you.